Yeah. You just went glitchy on me. Oh, there you go.
Here we are.
Finally.
Yeah.
All right. So to pull back the curtain a little bit on our podcast, we said let's record at 8:45. I think we both got on here a little bit before 9. It's now 9:38.
Oh God.
We've both been sitting here talking about real estate and what's going on. And finally we realized, like, why don't we just push record? Because it's more of a structured thing. But the reason we did this podcast to begin with is because we both sit there and we talk about real estate and we ask about how's your day and what are you working on and what's going on and how's this going. And so we're mid conversation. And so what Tavis is talking about right now is, we're talking about starting a few different websites and, trying to figure out how to take advantage of what we're doing and move our businesses forward and all that sort of thing. And so, Tavis, we mention it from time to time, does design work and does really good design work. And we've actually interviewed Jessica Starr, who makes floor plans from scratch and she sells them. And so we were just having this discussion of, one, is this something that you really, really enjoy doing? And you're obviously good at it, but is this something that you can scale? And so kind of talk about, you were mentioning a project that you've got going over in Willow Bend and kind of the things you're having to do to that place.
Yeah. So, what I was talking about is just, I have a love and passion for design, and it's been incorporated into, my real estate background, as well as, fix and flip since, 2009. And in 2017, a friend of mine, actually Walter, who was on our show that owns Wallow, kind of got in my ear about, consulting and design work. And I didn't necessarily want to like build for people or become a full-time GC for people. And when I did GC or do different projects for people, I think the highest and best use that I create or bring to the table is my vision, is my knowledge and vision for seeing things that other people don't see. And so one of the things we were talking about here off air was, you were talking about kind of creating some building plans that could kind of be set in a library, and then you sell off these plans and make money that way.
Right. If you're doing the work anyway,
and you
just
tweak some
and,
things.
Yeah.
Yeah. But realistically, like a lot of where things have been for me over the last couple of years has been recreating floor plans inside of an existing home. And depending on how simple it may be, we have a friend of ours that's in Grapevine. Shout out to Kip if he's listening. What's up, he lives in a small home out in Grapevine. And one of the scenarios is, it's a very small home. The master bath is cramped, very small master closet. And it had been renovated before, but they didn't do a lot to change space. And so he hired me to come up with, what can we do? What can we do to make things a little bit more functional? I don't want to go crazy. I don't have a crazy budget, but what can I do? And so we added a little master closet bump out and rework the master bath a little bit just so it functions better. And then just added like a little breakfast nook extension, and it allow us to flip the laundry around for access. Anyway, so just very minor stuff. But it makes a big difference. And then my team can go in and we do these 3D renderings, and then we design it and basically create this vision of what it can be, all the way down to tile choices and paint choices. And it makes it much easier for the consumer now to get bids, because not only do you have a floor plan, but now you have 3D renderings to say, hey, Mr. GC, hey, Mr. Builder, this is what I want, so bid it here. And so that's one of the things that we've seen a value in this market is with consumers and buyers that are buying these old homes and maybe don't have a full vision. Maybe they have somewhat of an idea of a floor plan, but they don't have the idea of how it's all going to look when it's done. And so that's something that we've been able to create. And it's been really cool. We've been able to do it with several people. Some of the recent projects that we did were even 90s builds. And the project we were talking about here off air was a It's a 90s build in Willow Bend golf course. It backs up to um, two different fairways and two ponds. I mean, it's a gorgeous property, and it's a little smaller than some of the comps in there. And so the consumer had bought this home, I believe, in the early 2000s, maybe mid 2000s. He bought it for a really good price. It's a 90s build, and it hadn't done anything to it. He's just rented it. It's basically been a higher end rental property for a long time. And so we're going in, it's like a time capsule of 1992 or 93. Yeah. And, he wants to basically modernize it and give it more of a contemporary flair. And
a lot of crown molding, sort of a peach.
Oh yeah. It has all of that. It has all of that. Right. So, I mean, you can do that. You can do a cosmetic uplift. That's easy. Right. I think a lot of people have, but he wanted to get a little bit more creative and bring in the floor plan up to date. And so upstairs, for instance, we're adding 2 bathrooms. So every bedroom now has its own suite and then a powder bathroom upstairs. So that is a big value add. I mean, appraisers see that, and you do get a lot of value when you add bathrooms. So I got the upstairs laid out pretty good. And then downstairs, trying to rework it. It was just kind of funky how you come through the home and then it opens up in the backside. And it was like a big peninsula style kitchen. And he wanted to modernize it and open it up and do a big floating island and all that cool stuff. And I was telling Ashton, I was just having, like artist block. I couldn't think about it. And I was kind of in a rush before we were going to Mexico to try to get this laid out. And I struggled with the downstairs floor plan and had to walk away from it twice because I just was not getting where I wanted to get with it. And I finally got something that I felt pretty cool with, pretty comfortable with. And, the cool thing with that is I kicked it back over to my draft guys, let them put it back in CAD, we cleaned it all up, got everything kind of laid out, made a few tweaks after that, and they kicked it to the client. And I think this client was a little critical, in the beginning. He was kind of one of those guys that, gave us a shot, but he didn't really know, what our background was. And part of that is because I don't have a website. I don't have all this advertising information out there. And so that's what Ashton and I were kind of talking about is I'm a little nervous to put a website together and do all this because it's not my primary focus. I enjoy doing it, but I'm worried about it blowing up and then not being able to keep up with the upkeep because my primary focus is still obviously my own rental portfolio, the properties I manage. We'll talk about a little bit about managing properties here in a little bit, but fix and flip and, my day-to-day duties on looking for opportunities to buy property is kind of my, my primary focus.
Yeah. So, well, the nice thing is you are, and I think the more skilled you get and the more you're in a market, people will recognize your talent. So it's nice that you have options. And I just think trying to hone in on how can you best take advantage of, your highest and best use, of course, what do you enjoy? And then are there ways to, maybe outsource a little bit, which I know you've had some troubles in the past, but are there some things that we can outsource, maybe 1 or 2 things here and there that kind of free up your time and make it enjoyable, or, you're just charging enough to where it's like, yeah, this is definitely worth it for me. But I mean, it is cool that, your talents and your ability to look at a house and, kind of put a vision out there. And I know you're working with Jason Castro, and I'd love to have him on the podcast at some point. If you don't follow Jason, he was on American Idol. I think he was one of the finalists. At the time, he had the really long dreads, and he was sort of, I don't think he played the ukulele, but something kind of like that or something. Like he had that real like island vibe.
Yeah, I think
he kind of had this island thing going.
Hallelujah, I think he did.
Yeah, super talented.
It went viral back then.
Oh man, he was popular. He was big time. And then he cut his hair. He got a family and a kid, but now he flips houses in Dallas. And his Instagram, he has a really cool. He has a style, and he has an aesthetic. As kind of
he's extremely talented, and not only in the music sector, but also in the design and the building industry. And so
got a good business going.
He's really good. It's always
we'd like to get him on.
When I hang out with him, he's always humming a tune or he's tapping on something, doing the drums or something. It's kind of crazy, but
yeah, that's
funny. So. Yeah, just circling back. I mean, I think a big part of what I have believed I can do, that I see things that other people don't see when it comes to an existing floor plan, in tweaking things and moving things around and knowing how it's going to work, not only from a functionality and a flow and a cosmetic, but also structurally.
Yeah.
Like, how can we structurally make this work? And that just comes from the years and years of doing fix and flips and building custom homes and being a part of that and just trying to put it together. Like, I mean, the other guys I work with are extremely good at like draft work and coming up with things and how things work and flow, but they don't have the boots on the ground experience from actually the building and seeing it, constructed. And so that's where together we make a really good team, because of, those things like that, knowing how it's going to work, or knowing that, hey, this roof may end up being an issue. We're going to have water issues here, things like that. So,
Well, cool. I'm glad you're busy. You've got a couple flips going. I actually just, we closed on the condo. I mentioned that last week. I'm helping a friend rent out his house over in Louisville. We've had a ton of activity there. And that's actually our real estate conversation later in the episode is going to be about, rental management and that sort of thing. So we're gonna hop into that. But why don't we talk about a market update? So in the DFW market, the Fed has not met since we talked last week. But leading into our conversation last week, they had just met. They hinted that they are going to try to drop the rates one time, and then I heard on the economic podcast, that it'll probably be a 0.25% drop, if it's going to be anything, but a 0.25 point towards the end of the year. So I'm sure that there will be an emotional reaction to that. And I do think that there will be people that will rush out and think that this is their opportunity to maybe go ahead and grab something up at a little cheaper. They can lock some things up. So I do anticipate that would create that response, but you just never know. I mean, if the Fed is saying, hey, here's a 0.25 point, and it's in October, and they're thinking, well, but next year we're really going to kill it, then other people may be waiting. But I mean, a good point that On the Market made was, when they're cutting rates 3, 4, 5 times in a 12-month period, that basically hints at a bad economy. So we're not really necessarily looking for that. We want something that's balanced, maybe a little cheaper, but balanced. But as we talked about, the actual income reports are showing that people's income is coming back towards the inflation a little bit. So the overall affordability, if you want to look at it that way, is getting a little bit better. The thing that they say is holding up any sort of drop in the rate right now are the job reports. And the Fed has said that they basically want that number to come down just a little bit more. And the long and short of it is they need some more people to be unemployed, and they need the economy to be a little bit in worse shape for them to justify, hey, let's make money cheaper. Let's try to stimulate the economy, because that's what it's going to do. So they're looking at the job reports. Everything else is looking decent. Inflation is coming down. Core inflation is coming down. But they say that the job market is still too strong to justify a drop. So that's what we're looking for. In the Dallas market, it's very relatively flat right now. The summer numbers are year over year similar. Obviously the activity picks up around the summer. People are looking to move, as noted in our rental, that we've had a lot of activity. People just kind of moving around, getting ready for school, that sort of thing. And so the actual sales numbers are going up. Inventory is going up a little bit. Days on market, depending on your pocket, you're probably 35 to 40 days. Your shows to pending, we've always looked at that. You're roughly 12, depending on which pocket you're in. And our average overall, the median cost is around 380 for the whole DFW market. But really, where we live, you're probably more closer to 440, somewhere in there, in the Collin County areas. And so those are your basic numbers. And we will now get into a little bit of news. So we've got several news stories. I did some research, and we did talk a little bit about these. This is what we do. We get in, we do a little pregame, but then we start talking about the stories, and we get on these little side tangents. So this is kind of what takes it. But I did find a story just a second ago that I did not tell you about. So interesting story out of Maine about this. This will get juicy on a national level because I guess it involves either a U.S. representative or the relatives of a U.S. representative. But the story is this basically. So there's a property that's on a hill, high end property on a hill that faces some water. I don't remember if it's the. I guess it's got to be the ocean somewhere. Maybe it's a lake, but it's nonetheless it's this hilly like we have around here. You know, you go uphill, you got multiple houses. In Malibu, we talked about that last week. It's built like this, where you go up the hill. There's more. There's more houses. Well, there's these really tall trees. So the house uphill has a relation to a U.S. senator and some really big donors and money and all these charitable organizations. Well, someone from their camp found their way down towards the shore, and they poisoned the trees along the shoreline so they would have a better view uphill. And so now all these trees and this stuff is dying downhill, and the people who own the house really close to the water are like, what the heck is happening? And I guess the people uphill were like, they came down sort of innocently, like, man, I hate this for you. Can we help you cut these down? So then they're like, they do some studies. They're like, wait a minute, this is a poison. And they track it back. I think someone from the family or the camp sort of admitted to, yeah, this is from us. And so now it's on these lawsuits in place. And now there's an environmental issue because they've put this poison so close to the water. And so I thought, man, that is the height of selfishness. But I'm sure there's a part of like resale value. If you have a house, it's like, well, the water is on the other side of those trees. You just can't quite see it. And they're like, what would be cool is if we could just get rid of a few of those trees back there. So I thought that was a crazy story. We've talked about Prosper before. Prosper has another $300 million development going in, 35 acres, a bunch of new restaurants and shops. Thank goodness we'll have something to go do. But Tavis, have you ever seen pictures of the Prosper High School cafeteria? Does this ring a bell to you at all? So the Prosper, this made the news this last week. This is what piqued my interest. And then I guess it went viral on TikTok and all this. The Prosper High School cafeteria has a Sonic, a Pizza Hut, and a Jimmy John's. And there might be other things. It looked like there was other signs. It's sort of like your traditional food court where you have some name brand stuff and some generic. But I guess they have other little generic stalls. But it looks like a mall food court at this high school. And I'm jealous, but I would have been broke if that were me. I definitely would not be taking my lunch if Jimmy John's was an option for high school. So you went to high school in Irving, is that right?
Yeah.
So Irving High School back in your day, back in whenever you were there, early 90s, late 80s, did it when were you in high school? You weren't late 80s. You were like 92. Do you graduate or something like that?
98.
You graduated in 98. I don't know why. So yes. So did you have anything close to a Sonic or a Pizza Hut at the Irving High School cafeteria?
No, we did not. It was funny. I think Tabitha and I were, and I did go. I split my high school years. My freshman and my sophomore year was in Rhode Island, and so there was a different. Although I do think in my freshman and sophomore year there was like a Taco Bell option, like you got burritos and tacos and stuff that were served in there. But when I came back to Dallas. I remember you had like your, and I grew up poor, so we qualified for like the free lunch. So you had the free lunch line, or you had the line that you paid for junk food, basically. And it was my first introduction to like cheese fries, and it was the waffle style fry, or not the waffle, but the wavy fries.
Yeah,
and dumped with liquid cheese and then that you could do chili on it. It was definitely very Texas style.
Yeah.
And I remember there was that, and then you had what was it? We were just Tabitha and
There's
I
probably
were
always
talking
pizza
about this.
There's always a pizza option.
You had pizza, but yeah, the cheese fries was the big thing,
the big player,
different in Texas. And then the big like Cookie Monster cookie ice cream cookie thing, I remember that. So
Yeah,
those are the big things I remember.
yeah, yeah. I remember in high school, of course, I was hefty back then as well. And one of the reasons was I loved dipping fries in mayonnaise. And I remember it was like this European, when I found out that the Belgians did, I'm like, this is the height of sophistication right here. You know, it's just French fries and mayonnaise, but it's like the most fattening thing you can do. But I remember doing that. But what's crazy, so my son went through high school. He never bought lunch one time at the school. It was kind of one of his bits. He just always took his lunch every day. Got up, made his lunch, took it. My daughter, on the other hand, she will buy on a regular basis. And I'll ask what it is, and it's the most idiocracy. It's just like I don't know who's coming up with this. It'll be hot Cheeto fried chili cheese, blah blah blah, and it's like with nuggets. It's just like this amalgamation of just junk food. Like they just kind of, it feels like they just go through some basket and just, well, this is what it is today: chicken ranch, chicken nuggets with cheese fries, and it's just horrible for you. So I'm glad that Luke took his lunch. I hope Allie sort of gets in that habit at some point. But so on the Market podcast, another statistic that came out in the news this week that I was really surprised about, they mentioned that a report came out that 38% of mortgages, or 38% of Americans don't have mortgages, which just seems like an insanely high number. But then they were talking about a lot of the baby boomers and that generation where they've been there for 40 years and they probably don't have a mortgage. So a lot of the people that you're buying your flips from, I know, are a little older, and I would imagine there's a ton of equity. Maybe a lot of them own them outright. You know, I know the one we're looking at over in Keller, they've been there 50 years. They own that one. But yeah, I thought that the 38% of cash owners is sort of a very high number.
No, it is. I mean, and it's. I mean, I think that's if you ask anybody that's got some sense of, you know, future mindset, right, wealth building, you know, retirement mentality. I mean, the goal is, yeah, to have your house paid for, right?
Yeah.
So I think it is. I think that. I mean, it's somewhat impressive, but it's also not so much impressive in the sense that means, you know, 62% of people have a mortgage.
Man, your math, your podcast math, getting a lot better.
Hey, as long as we're not talking dates and ages.
Episode 1 through 50, there's no way we would have been able to figure out that.
Like I said that before, you give me math with ages and you know, how old we were or how old, you know, in years. I don't know. Yeah. I can't do math when it comes to years for some reason. But
well, and maybe, you know, I'm not sure what the emotional part of it, but I think maybe the pandemic and the uncertainty of jobs for a while, maybe some people got really aggressive about, you know, paying down their house.
Well, I think you've had several people that, you know, that may have taken advantage of, you know, the increase of equity over the last several years, and selling their house and then downsizing, right? Because I mean, that's been an option for a lot of people, you know, and it really, you don't even have to be a baby boomer. I mean, you could have bought your house, you know, 15, 20 years ago and been in that position. I mean, heck, when we bought this primary home that we're in, I think we paid $159,000 for it originally, you know. Mind you, we've rebuilt it and ended up.
You added a second floor.
Yeah, we ended up spending $265,000 on it, like 5 years ago, 6 years
small
ago.
Reno.
About 6 years ago when we started this renovation project. But you know, the benefit of that was, I mean, our mortgage was so paid down that we were able to do a HELOC against it and borrow against the equity to put back into it, right? Yeah. So I mean, you have that. People have been in their homes, and you know, if they sell and downsize or something, they have a lot of equity in them. So I think that's probably another piece to the puzzle. Is that
I got another piece
to do it. Yeah,
go ahead. Another piece, and this goes to our next story. The people in California and New York who own houses that have experienced a lot of equity increase, maybe if they were there during a run up, but they're selling a house that's $1, $2, $3 million, and they've got some cash, they've got their percentage of equity. Well, they can go to another town, they can come to Dallas, or as in our story in Tennessee, they can go there and pay cash for a really nice place and they then all of a sudden they don't have a mortgage. And so, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people that are in that realm. But there was a story that I read on, I believe, Redfin News. And it was actually in the Dallas Morning News, because they did relate it back to Dallas and some of our smaller towns here. And down in Austin, you can see this. So, over in Taylor, we've seen some that they made a news recently. That's going to be one of the fastest growing towns in America because of all the new businesses that are going in over towards Taylor, which is just a little bit east of Round Rock and all that. But around here, we've got our Prospers and all your Annas and Melissas that have just exploded in population because of this influx of people. We have something like a net of 150,000 people a year coming to town, or something. I don't know, but it's a lot. Well, there's a town in Tennessee near Nashville, evidently, and the quote from the city council person that is also in real estate was, "I live in hell." that was the quote. "I live in hell." And her version of hell is there's way too many people from New York and California coming there. I mean, that was the gist of the article. It's like, not only are we growing, but all these libs are coming in and just taking over the town, and they're trying to push their agenda on us. And so this article was about the rush for a lot of these smaller towns. Like, holy cow, what are we going to do here? And we've seen this a little bit. Like, for instance, Lucas. I don't know how far back. I would love to know this, but how far back Lucas, which is near us, and it's in the northeast corner of Dallas, but kind of out in the country a little bit. But one of the things they're known for is they have a minimum acreage, a minimum lot size for a lot of their neighborhoods and their houses. And it really makes it keep it this very rural feel, and there's higher end houses out there. Well, this town is exploring that. And they're actually talking about having a minimum of 2.3 acres for a lot size, which is crazy, 2.3 acres. But it is interesting to see the growth in a lot of these towns. Like, I was up in Princeton. I've been up in Princeton a good bit because I've got a listing up there right now. And they seem to have welcomed whoever wants to be here, we're good with it. And I mean, there's some mobile homes, and there's some crammed together homes and some apartments, but just 15 minutes south of there is your Lucas, and just a little bit over to the west is Prosper. And they're going more for the high end South Lake. We want to be exclusive type area. So a lot of these city councils, I don't know, maybe they were slow to act, or no one really said anything, or they were cool with, hey, if someone wants to buy land, let's sell them land. But it is kind of an interesting thing to take a look at, and to see how these towns are reacting. But this lady's not handling it well. And I'm sure all of her friends from California and New York, when you refer to them as they are the cause that you, quote, live in hell, I think is actually fairly hilarious, a myopic view of the world, because from someone who statistically probably goes to church, she probably knows what hell is like. And I would think that just because there's a little bit more traffic and a few other people who don't have a Southern draw there, does not necessarily mean you're in hell. But feel free to move further out, I'm sure. Okay, so let's get into our conversation, our real estate. So every time we come to you on a Friday or late in the week, we do our update, kind of check in on our life, and then we always talk about our market, our DFW market, and then we talk about a little bit of news, and then we try to take a deep dive into the real estate world. Early on, we did some episodes that actually still really do well, by the way. I looked back, and a lot of people still like to go download our our flipping university, our real estate heavyweight university, and flipping 101 type stuff. We had, I think, 7 episodes on how to flip a house. Still really do well. People like that. So we may have to do another series kind of similar to that, where we're kind of do a 4 or 5 part series on breaking something down. But if you have not, go check those out, because we talk really in depth on how to flip a house and every little aspect of that. But so I have been helping a friend lease a house out, and he's doing it on the cheap. And so I went and took the pictures for him. I did a good job. I used a good camera. I was really proud with how they came out. I usually rail on realtors who use their iPhone, but I used a really good camera, and I did it right. So they looked good. And but he self-manages, and I know you self-manage. And our friend Aaron, who has the Tennessee the Tennessee rental. He's got a big short-term rental up there that he self-manages. We had Eric Crutchfield on the podcast, who evidently self-manages a ton of rentals, but a lot of people opt in for professional management. So I just want to talk about pros and cons, your thought process as to why you self-manage, and then maybe what would have to happen from a volume standpoint, or I guess pain in your rear end aspect, that you would pay someone to come in and manage. Management fees, I think, are around 10%, typically 10% of your monthly rent. So for instance, this one that I'm renting out right now is like $2,600, like $260 a month. So what is your thought process on your self-management?
So for me, I ended up being a landlord before I got licensed and actually went into real estate full time. I bought my first house when I was 21, and then we decided to move out of it. And that property's in Irving. Move out of that property when I was 23, and we ended up buying a house here in Plano. And so we just kind of by default, like, hey, let's try it out. And part of that concept was it didn't have a lot of equity in it from the time that I bought it. And, it was kind of a goal, like, hey, I think I want to hold it as a rental, be cool. But the original idea was actually somewhat of an idea of like, we'll rent it in the meantime in cash flow, and then we'll sell it to this tenant. And so we actually had like a conversation, with the tenant about like kind of renting it to buy it, and we didn't have like that agreement written, but it was kind of like a first right of refusal kind of concept of, hey, when you move out, or if we decide to sell it, you get first right to buy it, right? And so we kind of did that. Well, anyways, they ended up renting it for several years, and then we moved on to the next tenants, etc. But that was my first introduction to it, and I think Tabitha and I kind of somewhat became a natural of it in the sense of like just having an open conversation. And Tabitha was in underwriting for the mortgage industry. And so we had kind of a basis to know what to ask and what to qualify these tenants for, and, and do our research. And most people rent because there's some kind of hiccup, and most people rent. And some people have really good credit, or maybe they're young and they're starting out and renting makes more sense. But in a lot of cases, people rent because they can't buy, or they're not ready to buy, or whatever. And so you usually not going to be like your perfect credit candidate that rents your property. Also, if they have perfect credit and they can go buy, they may not be a long-term tenant. So they may only be there for a year, and then you're exchanging to a new tenant, and you have maybe a 1 month, 2 month vacancy, which hurts your numbers drastically, especially when you're not cash flowing a lot of money. And then you have your changeover with paint and carpet typically, right? So anyways, that's kind of what happened for us. Is we started out being a landlord first, and then ended up getting my real estate license and getting into it. So as time progressed, it just became more natural of like being in the industry, being, in and out of homes every day, to kind of just take that role on. And, and I think I treat it really well, from just having an open, clear communication with the tenant, set expectations in the beginning, and just run it just like I do my real estate business, So it's been fairly painless, I mean, over the years. I mean, if I've had a tenant that has a hard time paying rent, that it's that conversation, I mean, you're going through that now, unfortunately, with your property that you have.
Yeah.
But it's having that matter of fact conversation. And obviously when they don't communicate with you, you have more problems. But if you can get them to communicate with you, then you can try to navigate through those issues and try to create a solution. Back in the day, I had tenants that were really good tenants, had lived there maybe 3 or 4 years at that time, and he lost his job. And so I was able to rework the numbers for him and actually reduce the rent with a clause that said, hey, I'm going to reduce the rent for the time being that you're without a job, because they had a dual income, but the husband lost his job. Let me reduce the rent so you can pay rent, and I'll make something, even if it's costing me a little bit of negative in the meantime. It's not a vacancy. I'm not having to turn it over. I'm not having to go market it. And so it's just thinking outside the box sometimes when you have those situations. And he ended up
Yeah.
getting his job back, and then they got back on track. And then eventually, something happened with his job again. He's like, "Hey, we just can't afford it anymore. We're going to have to, go ahead and move out." And so they did. And so, those things happen. But I think it's just having that communication. Um, as we have grown and now have like the midterm rentals and stuff like that, um, they're a little bit more complex. They're a little bit more there's a lot of things to do on a turnover and get it ready. Once the tenant's in there, it's pretty hands off. I mean,
Mhm.
I was in Mexico and I got a call that, the Keurig broke on one of the properties. And so,
God.
you know,
Slumlord.
yeah.
Dude.
But fortunately, it
You don't
was
have a
easy enough.
Nespresso
Yeah,
machine. You got a
I know.
Keurig. They got to deal with that. Good Lord.
But it was easy. You go into Amazon and I bought another one and I shipped it directly to their house. And so those things are pretty easy. But as far as what we've done, and again, we don't have a huge portfolio. I mean, if we had 30, 40, 50 properties, 100 properties like some of my friends do, I can't imagine doing everything we do and trying to manage it. So at
Yeah.
that point, I think hiring a management company is important. As far as the comparison goes, um, I've heard horror stories. There's a lot of bad property management companies out there that don't care. They just want to, they don't really keep up with a lot of maintenance. They don't care for it as it's their property.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore they run it like a business. Their thing is about revenue. So they're trying to get tenants in and out. I mean, they do a lot of management companies have a very strict guideline on who they'll rent to and who they won't rent to.
Mm-hmm.
They usually don't necessarily have like that personal,
Yeah.
like Tabitha and I, one of our tenants, and she's been a great tenant and she's been there, I don't know, close to 8 years. She had some dings on her credit. In fact, she had an eviction, but it wasn't her. She had co-signed for her granddaughter. But we met her, we made her come to Plano. That was kind of first test, was like, hey, if you're willing to drive here to Plano, sit down with us in Starbucks, let's interview you and let's ask you some questions and see if you're a fit, you
Yeah.
know? And
So
she
this is a
did.
good question for me is because I was thinking about this yesterday because I was going to show the property and part of our agreement with my guy is that he didn't want a lockbox there. He didn't really, he wanted me to show the properties. Fine. But knowing from a fair housing standpoint and how serious everybody is about fair housing and you can't discriminate based on this and this and this, I mean, I was a little concerned. Like, of course, you just treat everyone professionally and like, hey, you give everyone the same information. Here's the link. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we're considering. But I did have that awareness of, when you're there and you're kind of now you're in person and you're actually talking with someone and you see what they pull up in, you see what race they are, and you're starting to get more of a picture of who they are. And it's like I would never want to be accused of, well, they didn't let me rent this because of this reason. And so I was like,
Hmm.
how would you avoid that? I just started becoming okay. If you're doing this at scale, is this why some property management companies are just really cold? It's a fax game. Like you're
Sure.
here. This is your income. Blah blah blah. All right, it's a yes, it's a no. It's more of an objective. You fit this, and nope, you don't. And but I totally understand from a landlord standpoint. It's like I kind of want to get a vibe for who this is. Is this seem like a good person? Are they going to take care of it? Can you get a feel for that? And so, like, how do you balance that and not eventually get sued? That was kind of my, I go, oh gosh, because I get both sides of it. I can definitely see
Yeah.
where they're coming from that law standpoint, but then also my guy and you and your landlord and any landlords like kind of want to know this is a good person that's going to take care of my house and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, I think at the end of the day, I mean, you have a decision to rent to somebody or not, right? But I do think, yeah. I mean, you've got to be sensitive of those guidelines, and do the right process. You get the right application. There's companies that do a background check for you, third parties. You use that service and get that done, and then you have kind of your rules and regulations too. Like I have a list of landlord rules and regulations, and basically the way I put it is like, hey, here's my rules and regulations. if you think that this is something that you can abide by and keep up with, then, then we're a fit. If you can't, then we're not a fit, and we'll go different directions. And sometimes you get a vibe for that, with people, just, people that can deal with those restrictions, or, people that can't, or, just trying to get the whole story, from the situation. Like I said, the lady that ended up driving to Starbucks for us, she was really nervous about paying us the application fee. And that was a big red flag. And we were like, what's up with that? And so we made her drive to Plano to meet with us and talk about it, because she was like, hey, if you're going to deny me, then I don't want to spend this money. And I'm like, I get that, but that's part of the process. And so she came out and we met with her and we asked her, all right, so what are we going to find? Like, what's on your background check? What's in your rental history? And we kind of got the whole story. And then Tabitha and I kind of left, and we were a little perturbed. It was kind of a weird interview, but we left, and we thought about it, and we just kind of felt like, our heart was in the right direction. And we're like, I think we need to take a chance on this lady. Because our expectations, I'll put it this way. She said she was retired. So we're like, great, fixed income. This is great. And she was retired. But I mean, her main source of income for her was Social Security. And the husband was working a little bit. But I mean, there was several things we had to kind of navigate through and make a calculated risk to decide that, she was going to be a good fit. And she's been a great fit. I mean, she loves her house, keeps up with it. Another thing that you can do is, most people have social media these days. True. So you can easily go and stalk somebody on social media and see if there's pictures of their home and how they live, and what the story looks like. I mean, people are doing that now when they hire people, so why not do it if they're a tenant? So I think that's just something you got to think about, is it's an agreement that you're doing. But going back to that, property management companies have a much more rigid system. They don't have a lot of gray area on tenants they accept. They have a very strict regimen, and I understand why, because they're managing hundreds of properties, and so they've got to kind of stick to a system and be very strategic. And then they've got to have their attorneys on board, and they've got to be willing to do evictions and all that stuff. I will say, knock on wood, I've never had to do an eviction in any of our rental properties. I've never had one go south to that degree. I've had them where it was like, okay, we're going to make an agreement not to continue this lease, based on certain things. But I've never had one have to end up being an eviction. I think just having that clear communication. So again, it works for us, but it doesn't work for everybody. There's some great companies out there. A shout out to Nick Good and Brian Force. I've heard really good things about their property management company called Homeward Property Management. So shout out to that if they're listening. And they've done a really good job of building a model that makes sense and working through it. And I think they're having a very good success rate in what they're doing. So I think it's just like anything. You get to a point you want to leverage your business, or you got people that are not in real estate full time, and it's an investment portfolio, and it's all about the leverage game, and so they want to be more in that passive role.
Yeah.
They don't want those phone calls. They don't want to worry about, things happening. I mean, I've definitely gotten the phone calls, but I think it's just strategic on having your team, where I've gotten a phone call that, hey, my toilet backed up, or it flooded my house, or, this is going on, and you've got to think through the steps. And I've had
Keurig's only working on the small and the medium, but not the large setting.
Yeah, exactly. So you got to work through that. And I think it's just, again, communication, but you want a property management company that's going to have a team ready to go as well.
Yeah.
And it's all about the win-win. The tenant's got to be happy, and you as a landlord's got to be happy, and the management company needs to be happy as well.
Yeah.
So, and we get into the Airbnb discussion or the short-term discussion. And there's some really good management companies out there that do a good job in that space too. They charge a lot more money because it's a lot more. There's a lot more things involved.
And I think it's like $25,000 to 35% maybe.
Yeah.
It's
There's
up
a lot
there.
more. There's a lot more boxes to check, right?
Yeah. Well,
In
you're
that
resetting
case,
the whole
especially
house,
if you're,
you know.
especially if you're doing short term,
Yeah.
where it's a weekend booking, and then you got somebody else backed up. And the thing about that is, you're building your calendar, and so you can't afford to miss one of those next
Terms.
bookings. At least with midterms, we typically don't book the next booking until we have, an exact termination date, in place. In a lot of cases, it's rare that I have one move out and move in the same day. It has happened, but it's rare. So we usually have a little bit of a time to turn over the house and a little bit of breathing room in between the tenants.
Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad you kind of discussed that. That was kind of my thoughts this last week of, my guy Mark has just a single house. He's renting over in Louisville. He's just he's interested in the real estate game, and I think wants to get more involved. But they have this rental, and it's gone well. His last tenant was there for 5 years. It was a really good tenant for him, and he came in and kind of freshened it up a little bit, but ready to get it back on the market. And you're hoping for that next person who's another 5 years that does a great job of taking care of it. And so, but at some point you have to just kind of pull the trigger and say, well, let's get somebody in there, because we're losing money every day that they're not there. So definitely a balance, but good thoughts on those things. Well, if you have not yet, please like and subscribe, follow us on Spotify and Apple. I looked at the statistics the other day, and Spotify is our number one referral partner for our podcast. And so I think that's very much where people are coming from. But then Apple is right after that. And then there's a random search engine that I don't even, Edge or something like that. And I was telling you, we had a kind of an influx of some downloads. We think we had a friend that went in and downloaded several for a road trip. But one of so it always tells me what countries our downloads are coming from. Of course, the United States is number one. In the past, we've had New Zealand and we've had Canada, but we may have, found ourselves on some sort of list, because our next two numbers is Russia and China. So somehow we have a few 5 or 6 people downloading our podcast over in Russia and China, one in Taiwan, several in the Philippines. My VA's in Philippines, so I know he's downloading. So it's always funny to see who else is out there downloading our stuff and getting some enjoyment out of it. So, all right. If you've not, please share this with a friend. We would love you forever for it. And until next time, we hope you have a great day.